Hello, guys. I have been kind of alluding to the fact that I was going to be sharing my full story here live of what happened on my 11th birthday, now 20 years ago, which is crazy. Thank you guys so much for all of the birthday love today. I really appreciate it. So I've honestly been thinking about doing this for the last couple months. I was asked to speak at Every 15 Minutes this year, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's a program that's very powerful that they put on at high schools to speak against drinking and driving. And I was asked to go share my story. And to be honest, it has been a very long time since I've spoken publicly and shared publicly all of the details. The last time that I did that was actually when I was a senior in high school in 2005, and a lot of my friends were involved, and I shared my story there as well. And it was rough, it's not easy, but at the same time, it's also healing to know that there's potential that every time that I speak this story of my life and what my family went through, that maybe it will cause, especially in that setting, one high schooler to make the right choice when it comes to getting behind the wheel under the influence. And so I decided that this year, 20 years is it's a big mark, I feel like, in my life. Every decade, 10 years was a big deal, and 20 years is a big deal. And sometimes I feel like as I re-speak this story that it's just that, a story. I feel like sometimes I forget that I actually lived through it and that my family lived through it. Thank you, Prashanta. But it's my truth. And so I wanted to share it because I feel like a lot of people are hurting and a lot of people are struggling in our world today. And a lot of people see me on social media and, all that I'm doing now, and they see my beautiful kids and my house and my husband, and they have no idea that I also have been through a lot of pain myself. And sometimes it just helps to have a little bit of encouragement to say, hey, I've been there too, and you can push through too, and you can get through this as well. So going back 20 years now, which is so nuts. On my 11th birthday, I was very involved in softball. And at the time, there was not a big softball presence in my little small town, and my family was always very supportive in my softball career at 11 years old. And so I decided to join a travel team that was in Modesto, which is about an hour away, and practice happened to fall on my 11th birthday. And I was kind of bummed, to be honest, but my dad and my parents both instilled with a very strong work ethic within me, and that when you commit to something, you follow through. And so my dad decided, hey, let's make this special, and I will take you on my motorcycle, and we will go have dinner together, and it will just be a special daddy-daughter day, and, so it will be something fun instead of something that I had to do. So I remember being so excited, but also a little bit nervous because I had ridden on his motorcycle before, but never that long. Like, it was always around our neighborhood. And so an hour-long motorcycle ride seemed like, wow, that's a big deal. But for those of you who didn't know him, my dad was 6'7". His nickname was 6'7" Kevin. He was a ginormous beast of a man. And so he always made me feel safe. And his motorcycle was pretty big too. And so I just, went with it. And so I remember like different snapshots of our trip. I remember taking off, and I remember being on the double lanes on our way to Modesto, and we had our helmets had microphones and speakers in them so we could talk to each other. And my dad was the biggest redneck dork. Like, he was always in Wranglers, and he sang not that great, but always at the top of his lungs, country music. Like, Garth Brooks was super cool, especially then. And I remember specifically him singing the song "I've Got Two Pina Coladas" so loud, and I was just laughing because he didn't quite sound like Garth. But it was fun. Like, that was my dad. He's the biggest dork. He played practical jokes on everybody. And so we were driving down the road. I remember stopping at the stoplight in Oakdale, and he was like, oh man, this is so crazy to think back that I even remember this. I was wearing my softball shorts and he was wearing shorts. It was the summer. It was June 18th. And I remember him saying, man, we should have wore pants. I was like, why? He's like, well, just in case we get in an accident, it's better to have pants on for road rash instead of shorts. I was like, oh, Dad, like, come on, we're not going to get in an accident. Crazy that I remember this part of the conversation. So we get to softball practice, and I remember feeling like so happy we were there, and it was going to be a great practice. I was a pitcher, and he was standing behind the catcher that was catching for me, and I remember just feeling like I was extra on that day. I was hitting my spots. I felt like I was throwing harder, and, I remember his, proud dad smile, and practice went great, and then it was time to go home. He's like, okay, Jess, let's go to dinner. You get to pick. And I don't know if any other women can relate to this, but especially at 11, I could not make up my mind. Do you want to eat there? Do you want to eat there? Do you want to eat there? I don't know. Like, I couldn't make up my mind. And so we're on our way home, and literally we got to the last restaurant before hitting a bunch of nothing and then Jamestown again. And he's like, okay, well, we have to stop here because there's nowhere else to stop. So we went to Mountain Mike's Pizza on the right, the very end of town. And had pizza together, and it was great. And I remember there was soccer on the TV, and I remember, like, distinctly this etched into my memory that he left to go call my mom on the payphone, because there was no cell phones at the time, to let her know that we were on our way home. But I remember being scared, like, because there's these guys in the corner, and I would be like, don't look at me. And I remember him coming back and feeling like my knight in shining armor, like, oh, I'm finally safe. Just that was kind of the feeling that he gave me. And then we got on our bikes. It was chilly, bundled up, and we headed home. And I remember seeing the white fence, like corral fence, pass by, and I remember him telling me that he loved me, and I told him that I loved him, and I'm so thankful that I have that memory, because I don't really remember much after that, to be honest. The next memory that I have was being in a hospital and having one of my I have two aunts on my mom's side, and I had one of each of them on the sides of me, and they're brushing my hair out because it was so matted and tangled with blood and mud and dirt that had been dried. And they told me that I had to get ready to talk to a police officer about the night of the accident, and I was still trying to gather what had happened. And so this is what had happened. In Jamestown, we were only literally maybe 10 minutes from home. In the other direction, that day, I've learned so much about this story since it happened, but the day that I had celebrating with my dad, there was someone else in our hometown who was having not so good of a day. And if there's anything that I've learned from this experience, it's that life is full of choices, and our choices are what dictate our future. And he chose that day that he was going to cope with his emotions and the difficulties that he was going through by going to the bar. And so he went to the bar, and he had a few drinks and a few more and a few more. And then later that night, he decided that he should go home. And so he made the decision to get behind the wheel and drive his truck home, which happened to be close to Jamestown. And in the split second that we were driving, I was right by, for those of you who are local, right by the Sierra Motors car dealership right there. He turned too soon, and it was in a split second, and my dad didn't have enough time to get out of the way, and he hit us head on. Our left legs were smashed. To give you an idea of how hard he hit, our left legs were smashed between the motorcycle and his truck. It was a big old truck. And then we also flew about 20 feet from the point of impact and landed on the grassy hill nearby. And we were both knocked unconscious. It's interesting, towards the end in a minute, I'm going to tell you about when I was able to speak to the drunk driver just last year. But hearing his recollection of the story, he said that he didn't know what happened. He just remembered feeling a bump. And then he was so intoxicated that he got out of the truck and went up to an officer and said, "I got to get out of here. I don't know what happened." He peed himself. And, so that's to kind of paint a picture of what it looked like at that moment. We were both unconscious. I guess I was coming in and out of consciousness, and both of our left legs were completely crushed. So we were both medi-flighted to separate trauma centers because our trauma was so bad. So I went to doctors, and my dad went to Memorial. And I every time I tell this story, I think about my mom. She was so young. She was 32 years old. I just turned 31. So I can only imagine, instead of getting a knock at the door from your husband and your daughter, you expected to be home. It was my uncle at the time who was in the sheriff's department and our pastor. And they said, "Gina, it's not good. We need to go now." Whew, I just can't imagine. So my mom gets in the car and has to drive an hour to where we're at in the hospital past the accident scene. And I can't imagine being in her shoes at that time. And so, gosh, I never get emotional. This is annoying. Okay, so we both had emergency surgery, and we were both put on life support. I was in a coma and on life support for a week. And I had, at the time, about 5 different surgeries to save my leg. And my dad had emergency surgery as well. After about a week, I started coming out of my coma. And I don't remember this. It's not like the movies where you see, your eyes slightly open and you see bright lights. I don't remember that. But apparently I started coming to, and that memory that I told you about was the first memory that I have. And then I had a police officer come and ask me about, was your dad drinking that night? And of course he wasn't, but what they wanted to know what had happened, and I couldn't really remember. I just knew that I had softball practice, and that was it. And so I slowly started healing. I'll post some pictures in the comments below this video after I post it that I have from me in the hospital, just because they're pretty powerful in my opinion. And that's when I started understanding that my dad wasn't doing very good, but he was still alive and stable, and he was in a different hospital, still in the ICU, and he was doing better though, is what we were told. And so they asked me if I wanted to go see him. And so, well, duh. Of course I wanted to go see him. I missed him, and I was worried about him. And so they arranged for a special transport. My leg was in traction. So I had, let me switch this around and see. You guys can see my scars right here. So this part, obviously my shin was smaller at the time, but I had 4 external rods sticking out here from my shins that stuck out about here, this high, and then this is my scar here on my femur. And so I had 48 staples and a metal pin that went from here to here, or a metal rod, and then 10 screws that went in here. And then I also had my leg in traction, and so I had here and here metal rods that went this way, and that connected to traction so that I could keep my leg elevated. And that was just part of the procedure to save it. So I was out of traction at the time, and they arranged for a special ambulance transport to his hospital so I could go see him. And I remember being wheeled into the ICU, and because he was so freakishly long, he had to have a special table at the end of the hospital bed for his feet. And I remember slowly watching as my eyes like traced up his body as I got closer, from his feet and his knees. And then I saw his face, and I'll never forget that, because it was, I realized in reflecting, like, I never saw my dad sleeping. I never saw weakness in him, because he was the ultimate like superhero in my eyes. And he was always like that strong man, you know. So to see him still unconscious and with tubes around and stuff, granted, I was told he looked so much better than he had before, but I still, like, I couldn't handle it. And that was my first experience with anxiety, and I never really felt that before. Just like a rush of adrenaline went over me, and I was scared and anxious and nervous and all at the same time. And I told them, like, I can't be in here. Take me out. I can't be in here. And little did I know, like, that was the last time that I was ever going to see his face. And so after that experience, I was stable enough to go home, and they had arranged for a hospital bed to be put in my home in my mom's room, and that's where I stayed. And I had nurses come to my house between once and twice a day for dressing changes, because I had so many complicated dressing changes. This is actually when I first realized that I loved the medical field. I really loved I asked them if I could do my own dressing changes. I begged to be able to take out my own staples. And I had, at that point, so many different positive and negative interactions with medical staff that I realized I really want to be a part of this when I grow up. You know, I thought at the time that I wanted to be a doctor, and I loved working with kids. I thought, you know, what a great opportunity to be there for people when they're struggling and to help them through. This is all when this started in my life. And so I moved home. My family was always around. I have a ginormous family, and they were incredibly supportive. They basically moved in. You know, my cousins were around all the time, and I would, unknowing how expensive medical supplies were, I would mummify them with a medical gauze because it was just fun for me. And of course, no one said anything. You know, I was doing good, and the prognosis for my dad was good. And then one day, on 4th of July weekend, my mom walked in to the room, and she looked horrible. And for those of you who don't know me personally, like, I'm always a very bubbly person, and I dealt with everything by being I'm very much an extrovert. So I was still, even though I was bedbound, I was very bubbly and happy and goofy, and that's just kind of how I dealt with everything. And so my mom walked in, and I could tell something was off, but she looked like she had the flu maybe. And I was like, oh, Mom, are you okay? Like, are you sick? Her eyes were just the reddest of red. And then my pastor walked in, and she shook her head, no, she wasn't okay. And then they brought my brother in, sat him next to me, and my cousins walked in, and my aunts and uncles and everyone that happened to be there. And I knew something was wrong. And then that's when my mom sat my brother down next to me and told us, Bobby, Jessica, Daddy went to be with Jesus last night. And I remember hearing that and, like, not understanding. Like, it was too much for my 11-year-old brain to comprehend what had happened. And, you know, we thought he was getting better. And, you know, of course, I just melted into a puddle of tears. And so did my brother and my mother and everyone else in the room. And I remember thinking, like, this doesn't make sense. We were in the same exact motorcycle accident. And, like, am I going to die too? I was so scared. And that is when, like, anxiety really ruled me for a while. I had to have the lights on and the TV on all the time. I was scared to go to sleep because I thought I wouldn't wake up. And I had to, like, process all of this at such a young age. And, you know, as if you have ever been a part of anything like that, you know, like, justification kind of kicks in. And I started thinking, like, wow, like, was this my fault? It was my birthday. You know, if we never would have, it was my softball practice. This never would have happened if he didn't take me, if like, what if I would have went to the bathroom another time and we were 2 minutes later, it wouldn't have happened. And so if for those of you who have ever tried to justify things in your mind, or have felt guilt for something that has happened that you've been a part of, I see you and I hear you, because that was really hard for me to process. And I know that that's not, my fault. I don't own that and I don't carry that. But at the time I did, and it was really hard to work through. So at that point in our life, we had to figure out how to live life. And it was another blow a few weeks later when we got the autopsy report. And I'm sharing all this with you because I want you to understand how and why I'm so passionate about helping people now in what I do, because this started at such a young age for me. When we got the autopsy report back, we justified that, well, if he survived, he would have been a vegetable, and he never would have wanted to live like that, ever. He would have wanted us to see him like that. And so this is for the better. And we got the autopsy report back that with his brain, everything was pretty much fine. It was actually a malpractice case. And what had happened is, when you come out of your coma, you're usually very agitated. And he was coming out of his coma. We have pictures of him hugging my mom and my uncles. And when at a point where no one was really watching him, he pulled out his feeding tube, and it was 4th of July weekend. And the nurse on call grabbed another tube and stuck it back into the hole where his feeding tube was and continued the feeding. Now, I know as a medical professional that that's very bad and not what you're supposed to do. You should always call the doctor, and you should have them surgically insert it and then x-ray to make sure that the tube's in the right place. But she didn't do that. And because she just stuck the tube back in, it was in a random part of his abdomen, and the tube feeding that was going randomly in his abdomen caused an infection called peritonitis. And they did not pay attention to the symptoms that he was showing for a couple days, and they didn't want to call the doctor, even though my mom was sobbing, begging them to, because it was 4th of July weekend. And that is actually what ended up killing him. And so that whole experience, really at a young age, I realized if I could make a difference in one person's life as a medical professional, preventing this from happening, if I could be there for other families who are going through hardships like this, that is what I'm going to do with my life. And so it's from a very deep place in my heart. Okay, let me take a drink of water. That my desire to help other people comes from. Sorry. Okay, so moving on. That's where this all started. So that's actually when I decided that I'm going to be a nurse. And thanks for the hearts, guys. And I went to nursing school. And then, it kind of took a couple different turns as far as what I do now. And, that's it for another story, another time. But I wanted to kind of end with this. The drunk driver who hit us, he got 15 years to life. And it was the first time that someone in California was charged with second-degree murder for drinking and driving. And it was, while that may seem like a victory, there's no kind of anything that will make up for what happened. And he had 9 other drinking and drivings in different states, and he just got his license back. For those of you who feel wronged by the system, I get it, I really do, but we can't live our lives in that victim mentality. We have to step out. We have to be strong and try and be the difference that we see a need for. And so it's very interesting. My dad was a correctional officer, and it's very interesting, just the cycle of life, because the drunk drivers in the California correctional system, he has failed the parole board twice, and the last time that he was up for parole, I got to go. And I went with my family, and we all got to hear his side of what happened that day, and we got to talk to him, not to him, I guess, at him, to the parole board, and I got to tell him that I forgive him, because the honest truth is that I do, and I have a long time ago, because I learned that when we hold on to anger and resentment for somebody, it doesn't affect them at all. It affects us. And I didn't want that for my life. Like, I wanted to choose to have a much higher quality of life. I wanted to choose to make an impact with my story and live my fullest life, and the life that my dad would have wanted me to live. And so it's not, yes, this was a very, very hard experience, but in the end, I choose what I do with it. I choose if I'm going to be a victim, or I choose if I'm going to use this to fuel me to be more and be better and encourage others and show other people who are in pain and who are hurting that you can choose to step out of this. And I feel you, and I know that life is so hard, and I know how painful it is, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to cry, and it's okay to feel that pain, but we have to choose to use that to make the world a better place, and to reach other people who are hurting, who don't have anyone. I was very blessed to have an incredible family and support system around me, and my faith in God. Like, I truly do not know how people get through things like this in life without a relationship with the Lord, because that is the only way that I'm kind of sane still. Like, that is it. And so, anyways, so I got to go to his parole board hearing and hear, even all these years later, even after serving 17, it was at the time 19 years in prison, he still made excuses. He still said, well, and granted, he had some hard stuff going on in his life, but he still made excuses and didn't really own up to the fact that, yes, I did this. And he could have easily said, okay, so I've worked in prison now for 4.5 years, and I know the programs available to inmates. He could have easily used this to say, I'm changing my life forever, and this is how I'm going to do it, and I'm taking advantage of every program that's available to me. I'm going to speak to young kids about drinking and driving. Like, he has the opportunity, but instead he chose to have the victim mentality still. Oh, I had a hard day that day. And of course he's sorry for what he did. Who wouldn't be? But it didn't really change him. And this is where I'd like to encourage you guys. Please know, I am not sharing this with you to have any pity, because I don't need it. I don't need any of that. I don't want it either. But I want to encourage you to know that no matter what's going on in your life, or what hardship you have faced or will face, you have a choice of what to do with that. And I have fully recognized that in my own life, and I'm thankful for the person that it's made me to be, and the inner strength that it's given me, and the lessons that it's taught me of the importance of petty stuff. It just doesn't matter. And I truly have one life to live. You have one life to live, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes almost losing that life in order to live it fully. And so I want you to recognize that we might not always be able to control what happens in our lives and what happens to us, but we can always control how we're going to perceive that and how we're going to react to it. Always. If we choose to be victims of it and let that define us, then that's what we choose to live. And if we choose to overcome it, and we choose to seek help to make it through, and we choose to share our stories, to realize that we are all broken humans in need of loving God and in need of each other, then, that's our choice too. And so just own where you're at in your life. and know that there's other people out there, and including myself, who are passionate about helping other people through their valleys as they're going through it. And don't believe the lies that this is it. Don't believe the lies that life's not fair and that's it. That's that. Because it's not true. You have so much potential, and you were created for such an amazing purpose, and this struggle is just part of your story. It's not over yet. And so if you take anything from this, just know that, like, your story is not over yet. And there's so many people that could really benefit from you and your heart and your passions and your gift. And that's what I get to do now, is I get to speak from the platform that I have through being a health coach and through partnering with Beachbody. It's really enabled me to have a platform to reach thousands of people that I never could have done on my own. And I'm able to and share that with them. And I'm able to really help people feel better. I'm able to be there for people in their deepest, darkest times, as a friend and a coach, or as a whatever, and I'm really thankful for that. And I'm really thankful that my life has led me to here where I'm at. And yeah, so that's that. Thank you guys for tuning in. Gosh, sorry about the tears. Did not mean for that to happen. I mean, I'm okay with being vulnerable, but not that vulnerable. Anyways, thank you guys for listening. I really appreciate it. I'll go back and read your comments. I couldn't read them through this, or I wouldn't have made it. But I love you guys, and I appreciate all of your encouragement. Thank you for all of the birthday wishes. This is the first time I've ever done this, so hopefully it was helpful and spoke to somebody. Have a great day.